There's a new voice calling out to central banks saying, do not prematurely stop your fight against inflation, and it's coming from a very unexpected source. The Bank of International Settlements is now urging central banks get the job done, citing the mistakes of the 1970s of declaring victory too early. The BIS is warning central banks not to repeat that mistake. Now, as I've said before, and I will say many times, as soon as you see the consensus by some of these major large players, organizations, bureaucratic agencies like consensus at the Fed and the BIS and many of these top-down central planners, these giant forums, agencies, anytime you see consensus coming from there, it is almost certainly wrong. Now, I do not mean by that it is wrong to try and fight inflation. They caused this inflation. They need to deal with this problem that they caused. I do not think that the mistake is tightening. I think the mistake was doing the stuff beforehand that made the tightening necessary. And I think the bigger mistake will be once they do beat inflation, how they will respond to that, because the way they're going to beat inflation is by causing a deep recession. In any case, once we see the data getting to the point where they believe it, it's already too late. The recession is already baked in. The hard landing is already almost a certainty. But there are some data points that are showing that the fight against inflation is not going to be done as easily as many people originally thought. We've got high and volatile energy prices. We've got high food prices. China's economy is reopening. Consumer spending is increasing at the fastest pace in over 2 years. And so we are seeing a stern warning to not ignore some of these signs and keep on fighting inflation. Don't declare victory before the fight is over. Borio, the head of economic research at the BIS, highlighted one of the things that could cause central banks to try and pull back from their tightening efforts prematurely, and that's government debt. He points out that before the inflation surge, government borrowing levels were at historical highs, and with interest rates at historical lows, the debt burden never felt so light. This would be like you looking at a credit card balance at 24% interest rate and thinking, man, the most I could afford to keep on a credit card balance at this interest rate is maybe, $2,000 a month. I would never want to keep more than that because I couldn't afford even the minimum payments then. But if you get a rate of, let's say 0%, an introductory rate, maybe you're able to afford the minimum payments on $20,000 on that credit card. So you load up on that, and that debt burden never felt so light because the interest rate was so low. But that's not a permanent interest rate, number one. And number two, it allows you to load up to a level of debt that if those rates ever change, man, that debt's going to crush you. And that's exactly what's happening to governments right now, especially the United States government. $31 trillion in debt, raising the debt ceiling left and right, increasing the deficit and increasing the spending every single year. Meanwhile, rates have been at historical lows, and all that old debt is maturing, getting rolled over to the higher and higher interest rate debt, and the spending is not slowing down. That introductory 0% rate has run out, and they're about to start feeling the pain. Real quick, want to give you guys some information about my brand new options course that I'm launching. If you are uninterested, just skip forward with the chapter markers below. I'm soon launching my brand new options mastery course. It is right now available for pre-order, and if you pre-order it, you will get access as a bundle, a bonus offer. I am including my portfolio allocation mastery course as well. So a couple of things you need to know. Number one, my options course is the most popular course I've ever sold. If you're one of those that bought my old options course, you'll automatically have this new options course. I've completely revamped it, refilmed it, made it much better in every way, letting you know that you already have access to it, so don't worry about that. If you would like to pre-order it, you will also get access to my portfolio allocation mastery course as a bonus bundle offer, but only if you pre-order it right now. I'm finishing up this course as fast as possible, so I do not know exactly how long this offer will be available, but if you do pre-order it, you get both for the price of just the options course. Link is in the description below. Now, many people have pointed out there are a few different ways that this can be dealt with. Number one, the Federal Reserve will have to lower rates in order to allow the government to roll over debt again at cheaper rates so that it doesn't have as big of a burden. I don't think that's the way they're going to go here, though. The reason is because if they lower rates, that has a stimulative effect on the rest of the economy as well, and everybody's borrowing costs go down. But it's very possible that the inflation rates are not where they want them to be by the time the government is in trouble, which means the Federal Reserve will be forced to do the other option instead, which will be resuming quantitative easing. For those of you who aren't aware, quantitative easing simply means the Fed buys debt from the open market. They buy US government bonds. So they buy bonds, that cash that they print to buy those bonds goes into the market. And then typically what happens is the banks that they bought that debt from, they turn around and loan those dollars to the United States government. Basically, it makes US government debt cheaper because they are using the banking system as a middleman between printing money and loaning that money to the United States government. In fact, the Federal Reserve could technically buy up a ton of federal government debt. They could, if they wanted to, just decide to try and buy all of the national debt. And just so you are aware, if the Federal Reserve owns the national debt, that means that debt is interest-free for the government, because all that interest then that they're paying to the Fed after expenses gets swept right back to the government. Now you're probably thinking, well, wouldn't that also have a stimulative effect on the rest of the economy? And not necessarily, because if the Fed continues to raise interest rates and maybe raises rates even more on the side, well, then that could have the effect of making all other debt for other players like corporations and individuals expensive while still funding the United States government. Basically, they would use the power of the printing press to avoid a government shutdown and avoid a government default while still making times extremely difficult, economically speaking, for private consumers in America. But as more and more voices call out for the Federal Reserve to increase and persist in its fight against inflation, it is only a matter of time before we see things spill over and we see the result of all that fighting, deflation. And the question then comes, what are they going to do about that? Because you cannot just increase the cost of the largest debt burden in history and have, an expectation that there will be no negative consequences. Either you're going to divert basically all the income to have to pay for and service that debt, aka austerity, or you're going to see defaults. Either way spells pretty much deflationary death spiral. And given recent history, deflation is probably the last thing that the Federal Reserve would ever let happen. They would probably let hyperinflation happen first. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.